It is one of the most bizarre UFO stories ever told. Aurora, Texas, April 17, 1897. Witnesses report a flying airship 5 years before the Wright brothers take flight.
Whatever was flying over Texas in 1897 was not man-made.
Evidence exists that shows that a UFO crashed at this site in 1897.
In the wreckage, a small, badly disfigured body is discovered. Described in newspapers as not an inhabitant of this world, he is buried in a local cemetery, and a legend is born. Some call it town folklore. Others call it the biggest event in human history.
There's a better example of a UFO, I don't know what it is.
Fact or fiction, truth or myth. Join us as we open the UFO files on Texas's Roswell. The 1947 Roswell incident may be the most famous UFO crash story of all time. But was it the first? On April 17, 1897, a mysterious airship was seen in the skies over the small Fort Worth suburb of Aurora, Texas, on a collision course with the home of a local judge.
The story of the Aurora crash is fairly simple and straightforward. According to the newspaper accounts at the time, early in the morning of April 17, 1897, a large silver cigar-shaped object came fluttering closer and closer to the earth, struck a tower at Judge Proctor's house, exploded, scattering debris all over the place.
2 days later, April 19, 1897, the Dallas Morning News reported,
about 6 o'clock this morning, the early risers of Aurora were astonished at the sudden appearance of the airship which has been sailing through the country. It was traveling due north and much nearer the earth than ever before. It sailed directly over the public square, and when it reached the north part of town, collided with the tower of Judge Proctor's windmill and went into pieces with a terrific explosion. Scattering debris over several acres of ground, wrecking the windmill and water tank, and destroying the judge's flower garden.
According to the local legend, many of Aurora's residents raced to Judge J.S. Proctor's farm to help in any way they could. What they found was beyond comprehension. The Dallas Morning News reported that someone or something was in the craft.
The pilot of the ship is supposed to have been the only one on board, and while his remains were badly disfigured, enough of the original has been picked up to show that he was not an inhabitant of this world. Mr. T.J. Weems, the United States Army Signal Services officer at this place and an authority on astronomy, gives it as his opinion that the pilot was a native of the planet Mars.
His description was that it was an alien in form, and he was referred to as a Martian. Now, the only reference to Martians at that time were in the drawings of the science fiction writers, so it could have been sparked in part by literature.
Of course, I wasn't there, so I can't say for sure who piloted the craft. All I can go is by the newspaper accounts, and they made it quite clear that the remains clearly indicated he was not an inhabitant of this world.
According to the Fort Worth Register, the alien did not survive. They reported that he was given a Christian burial in the town cemetery.
The fragments of the craft were then thrown down a well. The townspeople more or less wanted to forget about it, and I won't say pretend it didn't happen, but probably couldn't cope with what happened and didn't know.
A small stone was placed over the unmarked plot to confirm the grave of the airship pilot. But as time passed, he would not be allowed to rest in peace. Years have gone by, leaving fewer and fewer eyewitnesses to the events of April 1897. Eventually, the story became a legend, a colorful tale that some considered to be fiction. Judge Proctor's land was sold. The newspapers stopped writing about the incident in Aurora, and the gravesite became little more than a curiosity.
My initial reaction to the Aurora story, I have to admit, was a little bit of one of skepticism. But if you're going to be a history writer, you need to at least make a stab at trying to find out the truth. And that's what launched my investigation. When I began to research it, however, I found that there was more to the story than just the Aurora incident. I went to the Dallas Morning News, assuming that the Aurora story would be a headline on page 1. Well, it wasn't. It was buried in the middle of page 5. And what intrigued me was it wasn't even the first airship story on that page.
In fact, there were over a dozen different articles about the mysterious airships listed in the April 19th edition of the paper.
They released 16 in that same area the 2 days before this incident. 16 reported cases by reputable people is significant.
In late November 1896, thousands of witnesses reported seeing the mysterious airship 1,500 miles away over California. Over the next few months, the tale spread to more than 20 additional states from California to Michigan. In Texas alone, the airship was spotted in over 30 counties between April and May of 1897.
For those 2 months in 1897, literally hundreds of Texans saw something in the night air over Texas. They described it as cigar-shaped. Some people said it had lights. Some people said it didn't. Some said it could go 200, 150, 300 miles an hour. It could do things that airships today can barely do.
Top speed at that time was about 35 to 40 miles an hour by train. And for reputable people to say something flew over their head going more than 100 miles an hour would be the same as us saying something went over our head going thousands of miles an hour.
Texas historian Wallace Cheriton focused his research on the incident on the so-called witnesses listed in the newspaper articles.
What I was trying to do was prove, were these real people? I was very pleased to find, yes, they were. They were, in fact, real people.
When I first heard the stories of the airships, that excited me. It wasn't a lone incident. People across the country were experiencing something. That gave it validity. What were they seeing? Why were they seeing it?
I'm not sure that we'll ever know what they were seeing. What I am sure is they saw something. Could it have been a balloon? Perhaps. Probably not an airplane, since those didn't exist.
The first recorded man-made heavier-than-air flight was made, of course, by the Wright brothers in December of 1903 at Kitty Hawk. So whatever was flying over Texas in 1897 was not man-made.
In fact, while hot air balloons were commonly used in the late 1800s, they were not able to perform complicated maneuvers, such as right-angle turns and rapid altitude changes that had been described by witnesses. Patents had been registered for more advanced airships, but there is no record of any actually flying during that period.
We're talking about something that did not exist in 1897, and yet was seen by literally thousands of people. If there's a better example of a UFO, I don't know what it is.
Soon after the Aurora crash was reported, the sightings ended. Suddenly, there were questions. Were these sightings real, or were they all part of a gigantic hoax?
If you subtract out the known hoaxes, if you forget about them, what you're left with are hundreds of sightings by just common, everyday people that had absolutely no motive other than the fact, I saw something and I want to report it.
Over the years, we investigate hundreds, thousands of UFO reports. They're seen, they land, and they fly away. This was something where it was seen, crashed, and left behind an occupant. That's why, to me, Aurora was the best airship case to investigate. And then, it's before Roswell. No one's gone in to cover it up. They didn't know about it. So that, to me, was the ultimate case to get the evidence I needed to prove or disprove what was going on.
Coming up, the investigation focuses on the alien on board.
We sent a letter and asked permission to exhume the body.
Aurora, Texas, 1897, 50 years before Roswell. Newspapers reported a major crash and a dead spaceman buried in the Aurora cemetery. But as time went by, the story was lost. Then, 70 years later, it resurfaced.
Well, in 1973, Bill Case started writing articles for the Dallas Morning News, and that spread over the countryside. The interest jumped because, again, somebody was resurrecting the old Aurora crash in 1897.
The legend was reborn. Ufologists across the country scrambled to uncover the truth behind the possible alien graveyard. Hayden Hughes, the founder of the International UFO Bureau, was among the first to arrive in Aurora.
Aurora was the outstanding case to me because of the crash of one of the airships for study, and for the remains of a pilot to be studied or exhumed if he was buried.
Aurora was different. There was a body, a supposed alien body.
There's very few retrievable corpses or bodies associated with UFOs, but none that can be documented as well as the Aurora case. My belief in what the occupant pilot was what it was said, that it was the pilot of what the craft was. His description was that it was an alien in form.
It was small in stature, which would confirm the type of creatures that are seen most frequently aboard UFOs. They are small in stature, childlike in size.
The body, the crash site, the remnants of the airship. To Hughes, these had to be either the real thing or a hoax, and it was worth investigating.
As to what to expect when we came to Aurora that first time, I was quite surprised that it wasn't as big as I visualized it to be. Coming into town, where was it? Well, we just went through it. There's the cemetery, okay? There's the hill, the windmills over this way. There's some houses down this way are businesses. That was the extent of it.
Another surprise, Hughes's reception by the residents of Aurora. It appeared that they had no interest in solving the mystery.
One time you talked, the people were open. The next time, they were not. We were allowed in the cemetery on some occasions. On some occasions, we were barred and could not go in the cemetery. So the emotional level of the town kind of told me they wanted no involvement with it. I had gone from extreme excitement and the possibility of what we could get to a frustration in that it was like the town was against us from the beginning.
Then Hughes and other UFO researchers in Aurora had a breakthrough, the discovery of first-hand accounts of the crash. The witnesses were less than perfect. Some memories had faded, others were incomplete, and eyewitnesses were now in their 80s. Ufologist Jim Mars was among the first to interview the residents.
In 1973, I interviewed 3 people who were alive at the time. One, Robbie Hansen, said it was a hoax, but then by her own story, she was not a direct witness, had no direct knowledge of it. Her father was told about it, he laughed, thought it was a hoax, and that stuck in her mind.
But then, Mars discovered 2 witnesses who contradicted Hansen and offered first-hand accounts of the actual crash.
There's Mary Evans, who did recall that something crashed. Her parents went to look at the wreckage but would not let her go. So we have kind of an indirect witness there who says it did happen. And then we've got Charlie Stevens, who as a 10-year-old boy was out doing the chores and actually told me he saw the thing go over. He said it was trailing smoke and it seemed to be in trouble. He saw it disappear towards Aurora, heard the explosion, saw smoke going up. He wanted to go up and see what had happened, but his father, this old farmer in 1897, said, "No, son, we have to finish the chores." And he said his father went up into town the next day and came back and told him about all the wreckage that was lying around. So the preponderance of the eyewitness testimony leans towards something happened.
In addition to eyewitness accounts, researchers located one man who added a new twist to the investigation. Aurora resident Brawley Oates, who suffered from an extreme case of rheumatoid arthritis, believed his debilitating health condition was somehow connected to the Aurora legend.
Brawley Oates lived at the site of the crash. I believe he moved there in 1945. And when he moved there, he had the well cleaned out because it had all this metal stuff and debris down in it. And he needed to use it for water. Oates believes that the water in that well that he and his family drank for about 12 years affected their health drastically. In fact, he developed some of the worst arthritis conditions in his hands and other things that anybody has seen.
I don't see how a person could survive or could walk or could function in any way. And basically it was, they would either swell up so big that they would burst. And at times probably bigger than golf balls on your fingers. And he claimed that it was from maybe the water from the well that they used. That's the way he told it.
Brawley Oates told me that it was because of radiation from the well where people had thrown pieces of this Aurora spaceship.
But in sealing off the well on his property, Oates also sealed crucial evidence to the mystery inside. For researchers, the scientific evidence to support their case was becoming increasingly difficult to find.
We can't go on legends. We need scientific proof that you could take any court of law and prove that this event actually took place, as our investigation disclosed.
In 1973, investigators set out to the crash site and the graveyard. They hoped to find any evidence that could have survived the 75 years since the crash. Coming up, mysterious metal samples baffle the experts.
It's just a marvelous thing to have a piece of something you believe really could have come from a spaceship.
In the 1973 investigation, researchers found witnesses that authenticated an airship crash in April 1897. There were also claims of an alien buried in the local cemetery. But even with personal testimonies, ufologists realized that they needed scientific evidence. They hoped to find debris from the crash on the property formerly owned by Judge J.S. Proctor.
What happened to the metal is probably anyone's guess at this point. The best guess to me was the main bulk of it was hauled off, and what was left behind was thrown down the well.
Finding the well was easy, but researchers quickly discovered a problem. The well had been sealed off years earlier by the new property owner, Brawley Oates.
He had this big slab of 8 by 8 feet concrete over the old well. So to move that would be a major job.
Discouraged, investigators turned their search for clues to other parts of the property.
They went around and they got the little pinging of the machine, and they dig down and they find pieces of stuff. And some of the things they found were natural things you would find on a piece of property that had been around for years and had been farmed.
Nails, bolts, and many other identifiable items were dug up at the crash site. But then, something caught their attention.
One of the fellows from Corpus Christi, Texas, found a piece that was very significant that MUFON has actually had analyzed by John Schuessler.
This was tested 2 times. In 1973, immediately after it was taken out of the ground, it was transmitted to me, and I took it into an aerospace laboratory. This laboratory was one that was used to determine the failure modes of aircraft and spacecraft parts. So they had the latest and best equipment. They're the ones that did the first analysis and determined the unusual nature of it. The analysis showed that it had been there for a long, long time. And then when you cut into the metal, they were 95% pure aluminum and 5% iron. 5% iron in solution in aluminum is a no-no. It doesn't mix that way. It's like less than 1% normally. And when there is iron, there's usually zinc or other materials. There was none of that in this case.
Although the major aerospace laboratory that initially tested the sample has asked to remain anonymous for this program, Schuessler verified the results with the Nastis laboratories in Houston, Texas. According to Schuessler, both laboratories reached the same conclusion. Intrigued, he had the laboratories continue their tests on the sample to further determine the object's origin.
The stories were that this thing exploded. It blew molten material out of this vast explosion mess, and that material hit things and dried and cooled. Well, the structural analysis of the material showed that it was air-cooled on the ground after it had been molten in the air. So the structure was perfect to fit the story.
Has Schuessler uncovered the smoking gun to the Aurora crash?
The material found and analyzed in 1973 couldn't have been made at that time on that farm or in the town of Aurora or anywhere around there, but it had to have been made in a very sophisticated laboratory using ultra-pure refining techniques. It's just a marvelous thing to have a piece of something you believe really could have come from a spaceship.
Newspapers were quick to jump on the story of the new investigations into the airship crash, and as a result, the accuracy of the reporting suffered. Such was the case with a different sample sent to Dr. Tom Gray, now a professor emeritus at Kansas State University.
One day there was a knock at my door, and a gentleman came in, and he had in his possession pieces that he had found at the reported site of the spaceship crash in 1897.
Dr. Gray's colleague asked him to analyze the samples to determine if this was a piece of the Aurora spaceship. What you are looking at is the actual artifact that was tested.
I showed this piece to my father-in-law a few days after I had done the analysis, and his first comment to me was, where did you get that water pump impeller? And so I kind of knew that that didn't come from a spaceship for sure.
Once he determined the first sample's mundane origin, Dr. Gray began testing the two remaining metal strips. Once he discovered the pieces were primarily iron, he made an unusual finding.
When I checked their magnetic properties, I did it by basically putting them in the presence of a magnet, and they didn't interact with that magnet, and I thought, that's kind of interesting.
Perplexed, Dr. Gray searched for a certified metallurgist to give a second opinion on his puzzling find.
It turns out that iron-zinc alloys can be non-magnetic or magnetic depending on how they're cooled.
Then, Dr. Gray relayed his story, along with his conclusions, to his school newspaper.
When the article came out the next day in the campus newspaper, the headline basically said, "Physicist finds non-magnetic iron at site of Aurora spaceship crash." There wasn't one word in that article at all about the fact that I needed to talk to the metallurgist to find out what these properties were. And of course, then the cat was out of the bag, so to speak.
As a result, Dr. Gray, his findings, and the piece of the Aurora spaceship became a part of the legend. But this part of the saga was misrepresented.
Newspapers sometimes are in the business of reporting what they see as the news. That's not necessarily really what the news is. The real truth of the matter is, those materials were the kind of things you would have expected to find in a farmyard in Aurora, Texas.
Having gleaned all the evidence they could from the crash site, investigators now shifted their focus toward the Aurora Cemetery.
People said there was a body that was blown out of the craft and it was badly mangled. And the story was they gave it a Christian burial in the local cemetery.
We were trying to determine what was the oldest part of the cemetery. That was our logical place to start looking first.
They wandered around looking, and one of the local people said, those people aren't looking in the right place. You got to look for this 100-year-old gnarled oak tree. It's got a big beehive in it. So our investigators went there, and they found this small stone that looked like it had an etching of some kind of an airship.
Believing that they had finally found the spaceman's grave, investigators for the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, made another startling discovery.
And when they went to the grave site where this piece of stone was, they got the same decibel reading on their metal detector that they did from where they picked the material up from the ground.
Walter Andrus, former international director of MUFON, believes there is a connection between the samples located at the crash site and what was reading inside the grave.
The fact that they detected metal down in this grave indicated that someone must have buried, along with the body, some of the metal fragments from the crash site, which gives it more importance because it ties the two together. To find out if there was something there, we sent a certified letter to each of the members of the Cemetery Association in Aurora and asked permission to exhume the body.
But it was fairly impossible to do that because the Cemetery Association was dead set against it, and they were getting an injunction to stop it. And in fact, the day that everybody wanted to descend on the cemetery, they asked the sheriff of Wise County to put some deputies out there, and he did.
He said, we don't want people coming in the cemetery and digging all over because we're very proud of what we have here, and we don't want to see a lot of excavation going on looking for a body. Well, it's frustrating because if we could found that, this would be one of the bigger events, and we really would top off this whole investigation by coming up with an alien body.
After 2 weeks, the patrols ended, and MUFON investigators suffered a crushing blow to their research effort.
When we were able to get back to the grave site, the marker was gone. We don't know who took it or how.
Then, another blow.
Someone had driven a 3-inch pipe down into the earth there and apparently pulled the metal up in this 3-inch pipe. One of our MUFON investigators checked it and did not find any trace of metal with his metal detector.
What could have been evidence to authenticate the Aurora UFO mystery was gone. Coming up, skeptics fight back. Other explanations to the Aurora legend are far from being out of this world.
In Texas, we have an old saying that never let the truth stand in the way of a good story.
Was this really Texas's Roswell? That's what investigators in 1973 hoped to find out. But like the Roswell story in 1947, the Aurora, Texas legend grew larger and the story more twisted as each day passed. At every turn, skeptics challenged journalists and investigative agencies like the Mutual UFO Network and the International UFO Bureau, seeking to disprove their research. The theories ranged from balloons soaring through the sky to the belief the Aurora legend was merely concocted to save a dying town.
The most prevalent theory to explain the 1897 airship mystery is that it was a balloon. Well, unfortunately, there is physically no way it could have been a balloon. There are no balloons that can rise or fall with lightning speed. They cannot turn at right angles. They cannot go vertically up and vertically down. They simply can't do it.
I don't think the balloon theory is feasible in this because of the detailed descriptions of the different airships that were available at the time. The government, even in the 40s, tried to claim that different pilots were chasing balloons. Even the famous Roswell crash was a high-altitude balloon that had actually crashed. So the balloon theory has been there a long time.
With these facts, many dismissed the balloon theory. Other skeptics, however, theorize that the Aurora legend is simply a made-up story, invented by the author of the original Dallas Morning News article from April 19, 1897.
In my opinion, the Aurora story was one that was concocted by S.E. Hayden. I did find some people that seem to have recalled that their ancestors had said that Hayden was a great practical joker. And what a wonderful practical joke this was in 1897, except that it wasn't recognized at that.
I've heard the allegation that the author of this article, Mr. Hayden, was a prankster and a hoaxer. I've seen no hard evidence of that, and I've seen no other articles that he wrote that turned out to be wrong.
Although Cheriton is challenged by some experts, he offers a convincing argument to back up his claim.
If Hayden was acting as a reporter as opposed to a hoaxer, it seems very strange to me that he didn't follow the story up to say, well, people showed up for the burial of the alien, and we put a little grave marker over it, and somebody said a prayer. It was a wonderful ceremony. That, to me, would have been expected, but yet it didn't happen.
The mayor of Aurora, Texas, Barbara Brammer, has spent many years researching the town's history and believes her input may solve the Aurora legend.
The legend, from what I have been able to read, started after several disasters that we had in the city.
The first of those disasters was a brutal boll weevil infestation, which destroyed Aurora's primary cash crop, cotton.
Shortly thereafter, there was a fire on the west side of the town that destroyed several buildings, and several people lost their lives.
And the deaths did not stop there. Shortly after the fire, a massive outbreak of spotted fever nearly wiped out the remaining population of Aurora.
It was in 1896. Everybody tried to leave it could. The whole city at one time was under quarantine, and the only time they left their houses was whenever they went to the cemetery to bury someone.
In the early 1890s, Aurora saw a glimmer of hope. The railroad was set to lay track in the town and provide much-needed economic relief for the townsfolk.
They got as far as laying a spur in this direction for the railroad, and then another railroad was going to be coming from out west, and it got within 27 miles of this before it was stopped. And it became known then as the railroad that never was.
The town was crippled economically, and the resident spirits were crushed. It is this string of events that some believe might provide the motive for the Aurora legend.
Aurora definitely needed the railroad to save everything that it had going for it at that time. When it didn't come through, it started downhill. People started moving away. I believe the people who were left in this town needed something to look forward to, and this could be the reason that someone made up the story.
Although Mayor Brammer's theory goes a long way to explaining the legend, skeptics continued their assault on believers.
The debunkers said Judge Proctor did not have a windmill, okay, so therefore the whole story is bogus. According to Charlie Stevens, no, he did not technically have a windmill, but he had a wooden derrick windlass, which is a wooden tower used to haul up the sump on his well. So that's a matter of semantics. There was a wooden tower there that the thing could have crashed into.
In order to find evidence, I found one of the metal angle brackets that supported the wood arm of the windlass. One metal bracket is still there at the scene.
Another element of the legend has come under attack from skeptics. The initial identity of the spaceman came from T.J. Weems, a local member of the U.S. Army Signal Corps. It is argued that Weems was only the town blacksmith and in no way an expert on astronomy, like the newspaper claimed.
According to Charlie Stevens, T.J. Weems was also an amateur astronomer, had his own telescope, and was widely known as a lay expert on astronomy. So that argument that he didn't have any knowledge that's pretty specious too.
Despite the many explanations that researchers, journalists, and skeptics have for the Aurora legend, there is at least one thing that everyone can agree on.
As far as I'm concerned, it's still a good story.
It's a good story.
I wasn't around then, but my granddad could tell a pretty good story.
In Texas, we have an old saying that never let the truth stand in the way of a good story.
After 3 decades, Hayden Hughes returns to Aurora. But can he solve the riddle of the mysterious airship once and for all?
We have maybe one of the most scientific finds of the 20th century right here behind us.
It has been more than 100 years since the quiet of Aurora, Texas was allegedly shattered by the crash of a mysterious airship. Like the incident in Roswell, New Mexico, that supposedly took place in 1947, the truth may never be known. But to some ufologists, this case from 1897 may be the key to solving the whole UFO phenomena once and for all.
The significance of the Aurora encounter was that there was a body left to be studied, and that there were hundreds of sightings of the same description over the central United States during that time. We see what happened at Roswell, we see what happened at some other sightings, but this one held the answer, and because it was before modern day censorship, that's a key. It's still there. No one went in to cover it up.
While this former boomtown used to boast 3,000 inhabitants, there are only about 400 people living there today. The town may have decreased in size, but the controversy surrounding its most famous visitor has only grown. If nothing else, the tale of the mysterious airship crash has served to polarize Aurora, dividing believers from skeptics.
Aurora's big claim to fame has to be the legend. It's the thing that has lasted longer than anything else. Some people think it's a funny joke going around. They do not believe that this actually happened, and they'll laugh at you because they say it's such a hoax.
Well, we're dealing with belief systems here. And I found this when I first began to investigate this in the little town of Aurora. About half the people said, no, it was just a big hoax. The other half said, no, it really happened.
I had a feeling that they thought people were laughing at the little town of Aurora, even though the population there now had absolutely nothing to do with the airship mystery. I just always got the sense that this is not something they wanted to embrace.
Despite the town's ambivalence towards its famous legend, in 1976 they installed a plaque at the cemetery that supposedly houses the aliens' remains. Since the actual stone marker was stolen more than 30 years ago, it is impossible to know the precise location of the pilot's body.
To me, the only thing at this point that would satisfy it, it's pretty obvious we're not going to find a grave site to dig in. So, secondary, let's go to the well.
Although the windmill above the well no longer exists, the former Proctor property was purchased by Brawley Oates in 1945. Long-standing rumors hold that the well on the property was contaminated by radioactive debris. More than 100 years later, the legend has also grown to include a mysterious patch of ground that lacks vegetation. When the mayor shared details of this rumor with Hayden Hughes in 2005, it renewed his interest in solving the mystery.
Aurora, to me, had the most possibility of providing evidence that could confirm or deny the existence of the airships and the occupant. And when we left empty-handed, I saw it kind of as a failure because the evidence was still there. Maybe 2 feet under where we were standing, but still we were unable to walk away with something we could really go forth and say, all right, here's something. Let's investigate that further.
For the first time in over a quarter of a century, Hayden decided to revisit the place where it all began, the crash site.
This is the alleged crash site of the airship. We're on top of the hill, valley all the way around. This is where Proctor had his property. His windmill was here, and we had a well, which was later cemented in.
Certain areas are still accessible, but this fence stands in front of Judge Proctor's original well. Several requests to gain access to that part of the property were made for this program, but no calls were returned.
My gut feeling tells me we're onto it and there's something there, and I can't dispel that.
So close to where he feels the answers to the airship mystery lie, Hayden Hughes' frustration is palpable.
We have maybe one of the most scientific finds of the 20th century right here behind us, and we can't get to it because of this big bird cage that's been built over and cemented in, sealing below the evidence that may have contaminated the soil around it that is keeping vegetation from growing today. And if it could be possible to go down, dig up, whatever, that might be what it takes to put an end to this legend over all these years.
If we could find out what is in that well, we would know if there's any radiation occurring there, or even parts of the crash site. When that craft blew up and exploded, there could be pieces down in that well.
Most people search for just what's on the surface and don't take the time to really dig down and find out. You know, it's interesting to note that we're back here where it all started. Right here on this very site. Time has come and gone. A lot of stories has come and gone. Until we can get on the other side, until we can get some good soil samples or get down in the well, this is where the story's going to stay. It's rolling along and continuing to grow.
If the entire legend of the airship crash of 1897 is a hoax, then an amazing practical joke has been played on everyone by S.E. Hayden, the man who wrote the original newspaper article for the Dallas Morning News. But without concrete evidence, ufologists can neither debunk the hoax nor prove the legend to be true.
There are lots of legends and stories going around that are passed from word of mouth and through newspaper clippings and so on, but we deal with the facts. We investigate UFOs, and we try to prove beyond the question of a doubt when we investigate a case that it was a UFO.
I would say that the probability of the crash actually happening is probably 85%. I think there's strong evidence for that.
The Aurora spaceship crash of 1897, I believe, is the smoking gun of the UFO controversy. Because in earlier years, the debunkers would say, well, it's just misidentified aircraft, satellites, commercial, military, maybe even secret government test craft. Well, I often thought, wouldn't it be great if we had a well-documented instance of the UFO before any of that was in the air? And we do, with the Aurora, Texas crash of 1897.
We are fairly sure there was a crash at that site. I mean, all the physical evidence, all the stories about the people that were available at the time all go together and they all fit. It's not a mistaken identity and it's not a tall tale.
My conclusion, in a nutshell, something happened in 1897 that to this day we cannot explain. We can eliminate a lot of stuff. We know it wasn't a balloon. We know it wasn't an airplane. What was it? I don't know. UFO? Obviously. Where the UFO came from, that's the big mystery that, quite frankly, will probably never be solved.
Will the ultimate truth ever be known about the Aurora case?
I don't know. I would like to think that there is an alien in the grave, but it may come down to there's nothing in the grave. That's the legend.
A tale of war more than 3,000 years old has Josh diving deep into the Aegean Sea, taking aim from a chariot of fire, and journeying to an island with a history of extreme violence.
This is a big deal.
Troy, of gods and warriors on Digging for the Truth, next on the History Channel.
The Bermuda Triangle, one of the deadliest places on Earth. A hot zone where ships and airplanes vanish without a trace. But halfway around the globe, at its polar opposite, there lies another triangle. This one more mysterious and more deadly. It is known as the Dragon's Triangle.
The Dragon's Triangle is an area where ships disappear, planes disappear, and other kind of phenomena occur.
There's really no way to predict what sorts of things you're going to see out here. And we do see some pretty odd stuff.
We'll explore the mysteries, the evidence, and the science behind one of the most treacherous, dangerous, and puzzling triangle regions on the planet.
If your ship was right on top of that gas bubble, you would sink because you wouldn't have enough buoyancy to keep your ship floating.
As events involving ships, planes, and submarines continue to terrify passengers and mystify experts, many wonder, what is down there? And what could possibly be next in the Pacific's Bermuda Triangle? 25 degrees north, 142 degrees east. These are the coordinates of the center of one of the most mysterious triangle regions on Earth. For centuries, this area has hosted some of the most bizarre disappearances of ships, airplanes, and loss of life anywhere on the planet. But this is not the Bermuda Triangle. It is a 500,000 square mile area located in the deep waters of the Pacific Ocean. It is known as the Dragon's Triangle.
The Devil's Sea, or the Dragon's Triangle, is an area off the southern coast of Japan where supposedly many unexplained shipwrecks have taken place, where planes have disappeared, very similar to the Bermuda Triangle, in, of course, a very different part of the world.
The Dragon's Triangle is a large area of water off the east coast of Japan, bounded by Japan and Guam, in the Philippine Sea, in which navigators and ships have reported for thousands of years loss of ships, loss of compass readings, and strange objects flying out of the water.
Curiously, its counterpoint in the Atlantic, the infamous Bermuda Triangle, lies directly across the globe, along the 35-degree latitude line. Both areas are believed to contain some of the world's deepest waters, much of which remains unexplored to this day.
Both the Bermuda Triangle and the Dragon's Sea lie along the same latitude, and both have the same anomaly where geographic north and magnetic north seem to come together, so compass readings are off by 20 degrees. And that's why researchers believe there are so many lost planes and ships in these areas.
It's quite interesting to see that they are both at exactly the same location.
The boundaries of the Dragon's Triangle are generally believed to stretch from central Japan to Guam to the Mariana Islands. While lesser known to the west than the Bermuda Triangle, unexplained disappearances and strange phenomena occur in this area with a far greater and more alarming frequency. Since World War II, it is believed that over 1,500 vessels and hundreds of military, commercial, and civilian aircraft have disappeared.
The Dragon's Triangle has had many more ships disappear than the Bermuda Triangle. And the ships that have disappeared in the Dragon's Triangle have been large ones, military ships, cargo ships.
What's so odd about the Dragon's Triangle compared to the Bermuda Triangle is that the Bermuda Triangle has so much more press. Why would that be?
The area first gained modern notoriety in 1989 with the publication of Charles Berlitz's The Dragon's Triangle. Berlitz, coincidentally, was the author of the book The Bermuda Triangle, which reopened that mysterious case in 1974. For years, Berlitz studied the reports of ship and aircraft disappearances in this area, along with reports of UFO sightings and other anomalies. According to his research, compasses often fail or give wildly inaccurate readings in the triangle. Boats and airplanes report being moved far off course in a matter of seconds. Sightings of ghost ships have been reported for over 100 years. And finally, hundreds of ships, airplanes, and even submarines have, without warning, fallen to the bottom of this extremely deep region. One of Berlitz's most terrifying and puzzling unsolved cases involves what he considers unseen and unknown forces that pulled legendary pilot Amelia Earhart down to her death in the heart of the Triangle in 1937.
She goes more than 2/3 of the way around the world, over 22,000 miles. I look eastward over the Pacific, she writes. I shall be glad when we have the hazards of its navigation behind us. This fleeting radio contact is the last verified report of Amelia Earhart.
Here's a story where Amelia Earhart was flying off Guam, Some say she was on a spy mission for the United States, and she lost her compass bearings.
July 2nd, 1937, 12:30 p.m. Pioneering aviator Amelia Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan left Lae, New Guinea on the last leg of a round-the-world flight. Their flight plan would have taken them 2,500 miles to Howland Island for a refueling stop and over the Dragon's Triangle. The two were never seen again.
Her compass and her instruments went down. Her plane was lost. She was never heard from again.
To this day, Earhart's disappearance remains one of aviation's greatest unsolved cases.
The Dragon's Triangle is also host to stories of ghost ships appearing out of the fog.
Berlitz associates the Dragon's Triangle with one of the sea's greatest mysteries as well, ghost ships. Large ships floating at sea, completely devoid of people, cargo, and equipment. He claims the region has been fraught with unmanned floating hulks for centuries.
In Japanese tradition, these ghost ships are typically malevolent. They want to destroy the living people that they run into.
Ghost ships exceeding 100,000 tons have been seen floating aimlessly in the Dragon's Triangle. If true, how does an entire crew vanish without a trace? Berlitz points out a pair of horrifying ghost ship cases in his book. June 11th, 1881, 4 a.m. According to reports, the HMS Bashante encountered the legendary glowing Flying Dutchman ghost ship late at night in the deepest area of the Dragon's Triangle. A naval ensign aboard the ship, a prince who would later become England's King George V, made the following entry in the ship's log.
The Flying Dutchman crossed our bows. She emitted a strange phosphorescent light, as of a phantom ship, all aglow. She came up on the port bow, where also the officer of the watch from the bridge saw her. But on arrival, there was no vestige or any sign whatever of any material ship to be seen, either near or right away to the horizon. The night became clear and the sea calm.
January 1989. Berlitz says that a Japanese whaling ship skippered by Captain Moro Sagakami came within 50 feet of a small fishing boat that was bobbing erratically in their course one dark, clear night. The captain and several crew members arrived to find a ship completely barren of all crew and cargo, save for the corpse of the captain, still gripping the helm.
As far as ghost ships are concerned, what if the crews themselves were abductees? So the reason the vessel is adrift, the reason there's no crew, no remains, is that the crews are simply gone, taken by a USO.
According to Berlitz's research, dozens of vessels have gone even further off the radar. They have disappeared from the triangle entirely. On April 19, 1949, the Kuroshio Maru No. 1 disappears with a reported crew of 23. On June 8, 1952, 29 crew members of the Chifuku Maru No. 5 vanish. June 26, 1955, a U.S. Air Force F-3B jet loses radio contact with its base. Its two-man crew disappears. March 12, 1957, 8 crewmen aboard a United States Air Force KD-50 tanker transport are reported missing. June 7, 1963, remains of the Donan Maru are found floating on the ocean surface off Shio Nomizaki. But an event forever etched into triangle lore and Japanese history is the mysterious sinking of the Japanese research vessel Kaiyo Maru No. 5.
Kaiyo Maru No. 5 was a Coast Guard ship researching about that area.
On September 24, 1952, the Japanese Maritime Safety Agency research vessel Kaiyo Maru No. 5 is in the Dragon's Triangle.
She went out to the Dragon's Triangle specifically to find out the cause of all the losses of vessels in that area.
Suddenly, without any distress call, she disappears forever, taking with her a crew of 22 and 9 scientists. In their official Kaiyo Maru No. 5 accident investigation report from March 1953, the Marine Coast Guard states, "We have to investigate when, where, why it disappeared, because there are no witnesses and no survivors for this accident." While many conclude that the ship fell victim to an underwater volcano's eruption, Others remain unconvinced.
Very ironic that here you have a ship that's going out looking for other ships and it disappears. And that oftentimes happens in these mysterious triangles.
Because of this event's importance to Japanese maritime history, today in Tokyo there is a shrine dedicated to the memory of those lost in this mysterious sinking. Coming up, commercial and military pilots and captains report frightening shifts of the time-space continuum when navigating through the Dragon's Triangle.
He had experienced missing time during the period he saw the UFO.
Like the Bermuda Triangle in the Atlantic, the Dragon's Triangle in the Pacific just off Japan is believed to play havoc with the so-called time-space continuum of planet Earth. This unexplained phenomenon reportedly causes ships and airplanes to be forced off course by miles and miles, and for clocks to suddenly change time, all in an instant.
Some of the theories for the Dragon's Triangle include that it's an anomaly, that there's some kind of magnetic anomaly, that there's some kind of black hole in the ocean, that there's something from outer space that zooms down and has some kind of interaction with, craft there and they disappear. But as far as we know, things happen there and we don't know why.
In the late 1950s, American television and radio personality Arthur Godfrey, an accomplished pilot in his own right, reportedly experiences a frightening occurrence in the Dragon's Triangle, one that nearly cost him his life.
In the 1950s, the band leader and television personality from America, Arthur Godfrey, was piloting a twin-engine craft over the Dragon's Triangle. He saw a USO. The instruments on his plane went dead. He was low on fuel. He had to navigate by the sun because his compass was out. When his instruments came back on and he was able to get over land again, he found out the same exact thing, that he had experienced missing time during the period.
With only enough fuel for 3 hours, Godfrey piloted his craft on dead reckoning. After 1 hour, his instrumentation returned, and he was able to return to course. However, Godfrey would later report that he inexplicably lost a half hour. His clocks literally rolled backwards. Fortunately for Godfrey and his crew, they safely arrived in Tokyo, avoiding the terrible fate of Amelia Earhart and countless others in the Dragon's Triangle. Other similar time-space anomalies over the Triangle have been reported by military pilots in the 1950s and 60s, including Air Force pilot Frank Hopkins, an advisor to the 106th Air Transport Group. In the summer of 1968, he wrote to Argosy magazine with a story of a time-space continuum shift while flying a C-97 Stratofreighter over the Dragon's Triangle. In the spring of 1966, I was a basic navigator aboard an Air Guard C-97 flying from Kwajalein Island to Guam. We looked forward to a pleasant night flight of about 6 to 6.5 hours. Hopkins says that, as per protocol, he plots his position hourly using star navigation. But during the third hour of the flight, something inexplicable occurs. I shot a second celestial fix. Weather was excellent. Only problem was, and I almost fell out of the airplane when I put this on the chart, this last fix was almost 340 nautical miles down intended course. I rechecked and rechecked. A plugging old C-97 covered 340 nautical miles in 1 hour of time for no apparent reason. Later, upon landing on Guam, Hopkins reports to his duty officer that his airplane jumped many hundreds of miles ahead of course, but no report is filed. Hopkins says that he remains convinced, however, that this area is indeed home to peculiar forces that pose great danger to airplanes and ships. Due to the confluence of these events, experts continue to feel other forces might possibly be at work deep below the Triangle.
Of all the anomalies in the Dragon's Triangle, none are more mysterious than the vast number of sightings of UFOs.
According to Charles Berlitz's Dragon's Triangle, he believes the most notorious cause of deadly events in the area are the specter of UFOs and their underwater counterparts, USOs, unidentified submerged objects. Quote, a number of ships that have disappeared in the Dragon's Triangle have been sunk by USOs. These events were often attributed in ancient times to angry demons or dragons.
The Japanese were very influenced by the Chinese, and the Chinese were great believers in dragons, and that these dragons were somehow at sea and they could, rise up. And the dragon was both a propitious and a threatening symbol.
UFO experts in Japan and researchers like Berlitz all believe the apparitions in the triangle, thought to be monsters and dragons by early witnesses, were in fact UFOs. These reports continue to this day.
As we studied about this area, we found many interesting scientific reasons for these incidents, which had been called mysterious.
There was a report in the Japan Sea by a fishing boat. The fishermen reported seeing a huge UFO flying back and forth and lights in the ocean.
Japanese ufologist Junichiro Kato, head of OurJ, the Organization of UFO Research Japan, has been studying UFO phenomenon for almost 20 years. He has seen UFOs on numerous occasions over the waters near Japan and has photographed many of his sightings.
I have so many photographs. There are maybe over 200 sightings. At one point, I witnessed 1 or 2 a month.
The eastern tip of the Dragon's Triangle is believed by experts to even include portions of the city of Tokyo. On June 14, 1997, Kato snapped a photograph of a fast-moving glowing disk, moving at, he estimates, over 500 miles per hour just above the waters off Tokyo Bay.
I took a picture of 3 UFOs flying in formation over the ocean near Tokyo Disneyland. The 3 UFOs made a triangle shape. This event was seen by 10 witnesses.
The event was phoned into local Tokyo news outlets by several witnesses, but media reports were never filed. Kato was not the only modern Japanese witness to inform the History Channel of sightings of UFO-like objects over the Dragon's Triangle. Nobu Miyoshi, a Tokyo-based magazine editor, witnessed a UFO over the Dragon's Triangle while on this quiet beach about 30 miles south of Tokyo in 1990.
In August of 1990, I saw an airplane going in one direction, and a white light appeared very close to the jet, and I wondered what it was. It moved like it was writing a W in the sky. It moved at 1 kilometer per second. It was quite quick. Before that, I didn't believe in UFOs. But since then, I became a believer.
This unique experience leaves an indelible impression on Nobu.
I wasn't scared. I was very surprised. I'd love to see it again and watch it much closer.
Throughout the 20th century, eyewitness reports of UFO sightings in the Dragon's Triangle began to swell, from verbal reports from fishermen to official reports from military men and women. After World War II, the Soviet Navy had one of the largest active fleets in the Northern Pacific. Over the years, sailors and officers aboard these vessels have been responsible for some of the best UFO reports in the Dragon's Triangle.
In 1977, the Reconnaissance Division of the Soviet Navy organized a scientific research project to examine the issue of UFOs in the water. I was in charge of this group. At the end of 1977, we gave our large naval vessels instructions on how to observe UFOs.
August 18, 1980. According to reports from Moscow-based UFO experts Vladimir Ajaja, the Russian research vessel Vladimir Volbedov moved slowly south through the Dragon's Triangle, around Japan, heading toward Okinawa. Just after midnight, suddenly and without warning, a cylindrical metallic UFO-like object is seen to rise slowly from the sea, hover, then dart away into the sky. The object's ability to hover has caused experts like Ajaja to believe that the craft was not man-made. To this day, the event remains a mystery. 8 months after this Russian event, another significant incident occurs in almost the exact same location.
One of the more recent cases, and a fascinating case, is the Takikyoto Maru from 1981. They spotted a UFO, actually a USO, coming out of the water.
April 17, 1981. It is a clear day and the seas are calm. The 165-foot Japanese freighter Taki Kyoto Maru is sailing 200 miles off Kanazawa with over 30 crew members. Suddenly, the crew is rocked as shockwaves roll through their ship. The seamen immediately assume they've been hit.
April 17th of 1981, a Japanese ship sailing off the coast of Japan in an area that is noted as the Dragon's Triangle encountered a UFO that came out of the sea violently and caused huge waves to buffet the ship.
Captain Usuda is at the helm when a bright, saucer-shaped object rises out of the water. The USO is over 50 feet in diameter and hovers silently over the ship.
The ship's instruments, the compass, the various dials, the engines, all began to blur as the USO circled around the ship. The captain estimated that the USO circled the ship for about 15 minutes, then plunged back into the water.
The waves were so violent, Usuda reports, the ship nearly capsized. Even more fierce turbulence occurs when the USO returns to the water.
Here's the intriguing thing. When the instruments came back on, the captain compared the time on the radio to the time on the watches and found out the ship had lost 15 minutes in time.
Coming up, a near-miss collision over the Dragon's Triangle almost dooms air passengers, crewmen, and the UFO. Reports of UFOs observing and hovering close to large ships is not new to the Dragon's Triangle. According to Japanese ufologist Junichiro Narasawa, a Japanese government research vessel, Kaio Maru, is a ship with an impressive UFO-related history. Launched in 1967, she became the largest ship in the Ministry of Agriculture's fleet, weighing in at over 2,500 tons. The Kaio Maru was also considered to be one of the most advanced nautical research ships of her time. On two known occasions, 1984 and 1986, the premier research ship was reportedly tracked by a UFO. These chilling events were witnessed by at least 9 research scientists aboard the ship, including researcher Mikio Naganobu.
In December 1984, Mr. Naganobu was in the Falkland Islands at the southern end of South America. One night, he saw 24 UFOs. They were like lights floating in the sky. Then they suddenly went in 3 different directions.
The second reported sighting by the Kaio Maru occurs 2 years later, in 1986, but this time in the Dragon's Triangle. A huge, cigar-shaped UFO, over 100 feet long, is reported to approach the ship at high speed before diving into the water.
According to Mr. Naganobu, he witnessed another event in 1986 in the Japan Sea. A huge, cigar-shaped UFO approached the ship. The only thing they saw was a small red light that kept disappearing. But this time, the UFO was seen on radar.
These 2 extraordinary events were reported in detail in the Japanese edition of Scientific American magazine in September 1988.
Scientific American magazine reported about these incidents. In the article, the editor actually described that this event is very important because it's an official report of the government research ship of the Ministry of Agriculture.
Reports of UFOs in the Dragon's Triangle are not limited to the sea. From the Amelia Earhart incident onward, pilots have found the skies above the triangle to be as treacherous as the oceans below. A significant air-to-air UFO event occurred over the western end of the triangle, a near-miss collision between an unidentified aircraft and a Toa Airlines Convair 240.
One famous incident happened in Ikeda, when a pilot witnessed a UFO and the control tower announced to all the aircraft that there was a UFO approaching.
March 18th, 1965, 7:06 p.m. In a harried report to the air traffic control tower in Tomokazu, 43-year-old Captain Yoshiharu Inaba reports an unidentified oblong craft is approaching his jetliner as it cruises over the triangle, fast. Inaba then makes a 60-degree turn at over 500 miles per hour to avoid collision. The object stops abruptly, then follows alongside the airliner. Captain Inaba reports he's being shadowed by a UFO. He reports the object is 50 feet in length and radiates a greenish light. Several witnesses observed the situation from the ground. Meanwhile, a Piper Apache registered to Tokyo Airlines hears Captain Inaba's frantic transmissions. At 10:07 Universal Time, he sees the same UFO at 7,200 feet heading east to Osaka and toward the Dragon's Triangle. Air traffic controller Akira Taguchi was at his post when Captain Inaba radios his report. He later confirms the object was seen over the mountains near Hiroshima and near the island of Shikoku. The same day, at roughly the same time, engineers who worked in the mountains near Hiroshima said they had seen something which had been a flying saucer. These are the facts. Nobody knows what this object really was.
The Dragon's Triangle has been known for thousands of years. And one of the stories that's connected with it is that there's a dragon that lives under the ocean and comes out of the ocean and snatches craft and vessels down into the depths.
One of the world's earliest UFO stories, in fact, originates from the waters off Japan, along with what many believe to be the first modern drawings of UFOs. The legend of the Utsuro Bune, a mysterious alien woman who arrives from the bottom of the Pacific in a round craft-like vessel, goes back centuries. A closer look at the drawings reveals a flying saucer-shaped object, similar to those seen by countless witnesses in the 20th century. These drawings are thought to be the earliest known UFO-themed prints.
In the writings, they found a description of a bowl-like metal ship that arrived on a beach called Hiratono-hama. The witnesses approached and looked inside. There was a woman with smooth, light clothes. On the ship, there were letters that had never been seen before. They described what could have been a UFO in ancient Japan. There were no round ships in Japan at that time, so they believed it was a UFO.
Most interesting parts of the shapes of the Utsuro Bune, it is very similar to the modern UFOs. So my first interest is why the people can imagine this kind of shape 200 years ago.
Kazuo Tanaka, a professor at Gifu University in Tokyo, reopened the Utsuro Bune legend in 1997. His investigation led him to ask if the mysterious woman who came out of the waters of the Pacific so long ago was really part of, quote, a close encounter of the third kind.
I investigated all the ship in the Edo period, 200 years, intensively, but I could not find that any ships that is similar to these spherical shapes. This is similar to the Utsuro Bune. So it is very, very, I think, strange shape.
Beginning in the early 1800s, Japan suddenly sees a bounty of Utsuro Bune drawings, all by different artists in different parts of the country, each one telling the exact same story of a mysterious woman emerging from an eerily similar saucer-shaped craft.
The Utsuro Bune folklore is very famous in Japan, and handed down in many places in Japan. I could find 5 pictures. It is a little bit strange. So why people made so many drawings concerning the Utsuro Bune? It is a mistake.
These strange coincidences cause experts like Tanaka to wonder if Japan, which was completely closed to outsiders and outside news until 1857, experienced a mass UFO sighting at around this time.
The Utsuro Bune folklore in Japan has a key to solve the mystery of the modern UFOs, I think.
Coming up, scientists examine the theories behind the mysterious disappearance of vessels in the Dragon's Triangle. The mysteries of the sea pervade Japanese culture and history. Stories and legends surrounding UFO activity in the Dragon's Triangle have been around for centuries. On September 24th, 1235, strange celestial lights are seen to move and hover above General Yoritsumi's army encampment in Kyoto, which terrified the troops. The objects were thought to be dragons from the sea, on their way to attack them. 40 years later, 2 large-scale catastrophic events in the Dragon's Triangle would make world history and give its deep waters a deadly reputation.
The Devil's Triangle, which has accumulated a certain amount of lore in modern times, and this clearly, to some extent at least, reflects old Japanese traditions having to do with the sea, with dangers in the sea, with supernatural or even divine beings who live in the sea, who can both protect and also attack those who earn their livelihood from the sea, fishermen and so on.
In 1274, the Mongol Empire under Kublai Khan assembled a massive force of over 900 ships to conquer the one territory he coveted, Japan. Victory was more than assured until a single catastrophic event in the Triangle stopped this massive armada cold.
Mongolia was governing maybe half of Europe and all over Asia, and they tried to invade Japan as well. A typhoon came and all of the ships were sunk, and they couldn't reach Japan.
And they brought about 40,000 troops in 1274 to Japan. More than half of that fleet was sunk in this storm, and so the Mongols' first invasion ended up as a major disaster. You know, some 20,000 Mongols were killed in that instance or lost their lives.
Khan made another, more massive attack on Japan in 1281. This time he brought 140,000 men and 3,000 ships. The second invasion had similar disastrous results. An estimated 70,000 Mongol troops were destroyed, along with the majority of the ships.
The second great effort to invade Japan was once again defeated by the arrival of a propitious wind, as the Japanese like to call it. And this created the notion of the divine wind.
At the time of the Mongolian invasion, it is believed that the wind saved Japan.
Experts and historians alike still question if events in this anomalous zone are the work of divine winds of benevolent gods, strange meteorological occurrences, or possibly something else.
The fact that nature intervened on two separate occasions, I don't know, it did put a little bit of folklore into Japanese history as far as heavenly intervention protecting Japan.
As Japan was all but closed to outsiders over much of its history, experts fear that a great reserve of UFO research into the Triangle is forever lost. It was not until the late 19th century that reports became more frequent. The American official whose work helped open Japan's doors to the West was personally involved in a mystery involving possible UFOs in the Dragon's Triangle. July 8, 1853, 4 a.m. Commodore Matthew C. Perry is off the coast of Ulaga in Tokyo Bay. Suddenly, an unusual object emerges from the sky. Perry recorded this encounter in his log.
During the watch from midnight to 4 a.m., a very remarkable meteor was seen. It made its appearance in the south and west and illuminated the whole atmosphere. The spars, sails, and hulls of the ships in company, as well as our own, reflected its glare as distinctly as though a blue light were burning from each at the same time. From the south and west, about 15 degrees above the horizon, it pursued a northeasterly course in a direct line for a long distance, when it fell gradually toward the sea and disappeared.
What follows is a vivid description of something which does not resemble a meteor, something far more ominous.
Its shape was that of a large blue sphere with a red wedge-shaped tail, which, it could be easily observed, was formed of ignited particles and resembled the sparks of a rocket as they appear upon explosion.
UFO researchers in Japan are convinced that Commodore Perry, during one of the most important voyages west by an American, witnessed a UFO in the heart of the Dragon's Triangle.
There was a report of sightings of a UFO when the American leadership approached the Japanese government to open commerce. While his ship was floating at the Uraga, Perry wrote the report in his navigation diary. Others witnessed this sighting as well.
Perry continued to search for clues and answers, but died 5 years later in 1858, without further insight into the events of that night. Coming up, scientists at the world's largest wave tank at Tokyo University recreate some of the most dramatic events seen in the Dragon's Triangle.
This is where two big dragons are hiding themselves from 3,000 years ago. This area is called the Devil's Sea, and many ships have disappeared without good reason. Let's find out the biggest and strongest mystery of the 20th century, the Dragon's Triangle.
What we have seen is that in Japan and in the Ring of Fire, that before and after increased seismic activity or increased volcanic activity, there'll be a lot of sightings of these UFOs.
Deep beneath the Dragon's Triangle lies one of the most seismically active regions on the planet. Here gigantic undersea tectonic plates shift constantly, and suboceanic volcano eruptions are quite frequent, all of which might be responsible for significant shipping losses and dramatic loss of life.
Back in the States, we receive message traffic on a regular basis that tells us volcano warning alerts. So not only do we know where they are, we have them plotted on our charts. If I go down and check my email right now, I have about 8 or 10 messages from these guys telling us, hey, there's a volcano here that has shown some sort of seismic activity, and your best bet is to steer clear.
When you get an underwater eruption, depending on how deep it is, if it's pretty deep, you'll just get lava flows coming out, but if it's closer to the surface, you'll get actual gas in the magma that forms bubbles, and it's an explosive eruption.
Dr. Joanne Stock is professor of geology and geophysics at Caltech University in Pasadena, California.
One of the Mariana Islands, which was erupting in 2003, it had these eruptions that were on the island itself, and people could see that there's pulses of gas coming out. It actually has more than 80 little vents that are offshore that are also active. If one of those was erupting, you might see the peak of the volcano on the island. It doesn't look like anything's happening, but something could be erupting underwater where your ship is sailing near it and could be affected or could sink because too much gas is in the water.
The gases created by underwater volcanoes can wreak havoc with ships, even huge container and cargo ships.
If you happen to get a gas bubble, a big gas bubble that came out of a vent that was underwater, if your ship was right on top of that gas bubble, you would sink because you wouldn't have enough buoyancy to keep your ship floating.
The Ring of Fire that lies within the Dragon's Triangle is filled with dangerous volcanoes at varied depths.
The shallowest ones are these islands above sea level, and then they go on down, 10,000 feet.
Why is there so much volcanic activity surrounding Japan and this area?
It may come as a surprise to some people to realize that the majority of the volcanism on the planet Earth is happening on the seafloor.
Most of the Pacific Ocean floor is moving from east to west, and as the seafloor is dragged down into the interior of the Earth, this water reacts with hot rock and makes volcanoes.
Volcanoes along the Marianas, which are erupting as a result of this plate collision, can toss aerosols and particulate matter all the way up to the stratosphere, and obviously if a plane flew into that, it might clog the engines.
Another dangerous phenomenon in the Dragon's Triangle is the so-called triangle waves. These bizarre oceanic enigma are swift and deadly and impossible to predict.
There are big waves, 7, 8, 9 feet high, crashing in from different directions. This creates huge waves up to 65 feet high. This is the most dangerous thing that I have ever seen.
Japan is located where there are seasonal big winds. In the wintertime, there tends to be a lot of bad weather and turbulence. Winds from different directions create the triangle waves.
The term triangular wave, sankakunami in Japanese, is a name used by Japanese people from the past. What it represents from a scientific point of view is not known.
Dr. Hiroshi Tomita, special researcher at Japan's National Maritime Research Institute, and Dr. Takuji Waseda, professor at the University of Tokyo, performed a unique experiment for the History Channel in the world's largest wave tank. It demonstrates the destructive capabilities of the kinds of triangle waves and currents that affect this area.
A U.S. commercial ship reported that they actually saw a wave over 100 feet high, but it was measured by sight, so they don't have any scientific proof. What my team is trying to do is measure in a more scientific way.
There are 32 plungers at the end of the tank, which we control the amplitude of the phase from a computer. these tank tests are scalable. The same thing can happen in the real ocean.
Dr. Waseda illustrates the nature of a triangle wave.
As two waves process each other, the wave pattern will form a triangular shape. When a ship encounters these kind of triangular shaped wave, the ship can move in quite a different way. Sometimes it can move this way, but sometimes it can roll. Roll, for example, for a ship is extremely dangerous. The energy piles up. It is said that the amplitude can be quite high because of the crossing sea. Not being able to predict the direction of the forces is a threat for a ship.
The phenomenon of triangle waves is reportedly responsible for the destruction of many ships and great losses of life in the Dragon's Triangle.
I think the scientific knowledge is very similar to the jigsaw puzzle. We have no piece that matches the UFOs.
There are many reports of accidents, so I consider that it is a dangerous area. But we cannot define those accidents either from a volcano, natural causes, or some mysterious UFO.
For hundreds of years in the Dragon's Triangle, there have been countless reports of disappearances and eerie encounters with UFOs, drawing a perfect correlation to its mysterious counterpart in Bermuda, leading many researchers to call this hot zone the Pacific's Bermuda Triangle.
I've seen all the reports. I believe there are many people who see it and don't talk about it.
There are some people who say, I cannot believe until I see with my own eyes. But of course, the eyes are not always reliable. We have to research from many different points of view.
Maybe there are some doors that open frequently to the different dimensions on this planet. So, in theory, maybe it's possible there are doors like that in the ocean.
Modern researchers, both for the Dragon Sea off Japan and the Bermuda Triangle off the Florida coast, have hypothesized that there's an undersea UFO base or a USO base in those waters. They're very deep, there's a lot of volcanic activity, and sometimes the magnetic readings will throw off attempts to find objects on the bottom of the surface. So there may well be a USO base in the Dragon Sea off Japan.